Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. So today's kind of sketchbook doodles video is going to be a little bit different. I wanted to do first a quick run through of a few pencil sketches that I've done here and there, both in my current sketchbook and a previous few sketchbooks where I used to do a little bit more realism in those ones, but for the most part, sketching with pencil has always been my favorite, and you guys might be familiar with me working with some of my pencil work in this sketchbook too, so if you're interested, I'll have those ASMR ones linked in the description as well. But the reason why we're looking at this is because the kind people at Arrtx actually sent me their set of sketching pencils. So here's kind of what they look like. It's in this really cute compact cardboard kind of casing, and I'll show you guys a bit of a close-up here. So it's in this really cute yellow container, and it's basically 14 sketching pencils. So they are separated into 2 rows of 7, which will give us 14 pencils, and they come in these really cute kind of combinations of colors, which makes it a little bit easier for you to identify which particular pencil that you're using, because some other pencil brands, I know a lot of them have the barrels and the tip of them all the same colors, and the only way to identify them is actually via the letter and the number, but this way you can kind of spot them quite easily and pick out the ones that you need. So on the back of the case, you can see that there's a full range all the way from the 8B all the way down to 4H, and we'll get into what those mean in a little bit. So I believe that this set is very good for both beginners and intermediate artists, especially if you're looking to kind of push your value work and your pencil drawings to be a little bit further, or you want to have a more versatile kind of tool set for pencil drawing. So the cores of these pencils are also very firm, like kind of firm and sturdy, so they don't break too easily, even though some of these leads are a little bit softer, and I had very minimal breakage when I was working with them. I think only one pencil broke, and that was just the HB pencil, so it wasn't too bad anyways. So while we go through and do the swatches, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of the rundown of what each individual letter and the number means for these types of pencils if you're not familiar with them. So hopefully my memory will serve me correctly. I think the most common pencils being used and what you're mostly going to be familiar seeing with is that there's H pencils, there's HB, and then there's B. So HB is kind of our middle ground. It both has the hardness and the, I guess, blackness of a pencil that we're most used to because it is the most common one used in for like schoolwork and all that jazz, and it's kind of our base ground for everything. So if we kind of go to the left side and we go into H, which stands for hardness, the pencil tips and the core or the lead tends to be on the firmer side. It's a lot harder. It's easier for you to make lighter lines, and you don't have to worry about pressing too hard or anything like that. So it's good for sketching, drafting, anything like that, detailed work if you don't mind it being on the lighter side. Then we have F, which is fine, which is a little bit softer than the H pencils, but it is harder than the HB pencil. Then HB, like I said, is kind of your middle ground, and then we have our B pencils. So this is like your 2Bs, your 3Bs, 4Bs, 5Bs, 6Bs, 7Bs, 8Bs, etc. And B stands for, I believe, black, or the blackness of the pencil. So they tend to have a softer core. They're very much easier to get very dark marks and push the values a lot easier without having to press super hard. So right now I'm showing you guys kind of the swatches. I didn't do a very good job of keeping things consistent when doing the swatches, but for the most part you'll be able to see the kind of full range of everything, where you're going to be able to see how the H behaves versus the Bs. So the Bs, you can see it won't be the best for technically some detailed work unless you keep the point fairly sharp, but they are a little bit softer, but they're great for filling in dark areas, pushing the values without having to get that really shiny burnishing kind of effect when you press down on a pencil super hard. So it's good to have kind of like a full range when you're doing an illustration with just pencils if you wanted to. So it's good to have both your H's and your B's and HB kind of readily available if you need to. So one last thing I wanted to do before we get into the actual drawing is kind of doing a smudge test. So because the H pencils have a harder lead, they're going to smudge a lot less, and then the HB will smudge a okay amount, and the kind of B range will smudge quite a bit, but also give you kind of that more dark, rich kind of value compared to, let's say, the 4H. So I'm using a smudge stick. I'm going from lightest to darkest just because I don't want to produce too much lead residue from swapping between the different ones, but you can see there's going to be a difference between the different intensities of the pencils, and you can see that 8B pretty dark compared to, let's say, 4H, which kind of gives you a little bit more of that kind of lighter mid-tone-ish area. So if you guys are interested in checking out these pencils, I'll make sure to link any of the links down below and you can check them out, because I always adore Arrtx's wonderful kind of design for their products. Also, their product quality is quite nice, so do check them out. So even though I am kind of more of a mechanical pencil fiend, I tend to do a lot of my pencil work with mechanical pencil, and at some point when I did more realism, I also did that all with mechanical pencil. But for my mechanical pencils, I tend to only carry HB and 2B. It depends on what lead I'm carrying, but for the most part, you can still get a very good range, but it's still going to be somewhat limited if you plan to either really push your values. So I'm going to actually start off with saying that the thing I like about the fact that this is kind of more of a compact set, and like I mentioned, some people might prefer having the tins where you have them laid out all completely. For me, they feel a little bit more bulky. They take up a little bit more room vertically, or not vertically, I guess wide-wise. And then I don't like the rattling of the tin case, so I definitely prefer the cardboard. But for me, because it's kind of more compact and it's built like in rows of 2, I only use, let's say, I think for the last drawing that we're going to do today, we're going to do kind of like 3 different sketching sessions with these pencils. And for the one that I'm currently working on, I think I work with 4 different pencils. Maybe. If I can, I will try my best to match the pencil with text on the bottom so you know which one I'm using. So usually for these kinds of drawings, I will work from lightest to darkest, but then once we get to a certain ground portion, I will mostly work with the midtones and the dark portion so that we can kind of push and pull different parts of the values. But for the most part, for the sketching, I believe I used, this might be like 2H, 3H, something like that. And then we'll work on to going to, actually, no, I think I'm working with the fine pencil, and then I switched to the HB or 2B, and then for pushing of values, I used any of the Bs above that. But I'll make sure to put the specific ones on the screen so you know which ones I'm using. But basically, we're gradually pushing the values further and further. In terms of subject matter, I am going to be drawing 17's June from the most recent teaser photos for their Japanese promotions. Right, I got a little bit on a tangent. So for the, like I was talking about, the little compact case, so I put the pencils that I know I'm gonna frequently use a little bit more on the top. So I kind of split it evenly. So I picked maybe 1 or 2 of the H's. I put fine and HB on the top as well. So let's say I took 2H, I took fine and HB, so that's already 3. And then I will have usually the 2B, maybe the 4B, 6B, and 8B on the top so that we can kind of get a good range. But sometimes I'll mix and match. But for the most part, when I used to do a little bit more dry mediums back in uni, we tend to skip every other number. So like if you decide to go in the B range, if you have the full set, some people might select to do the odd numbers. So you can go just B, maybe 3B, and then 5B, 7B, etc. But for me, I tend to go 2B, 4B, 6B, 8B. And then some people have like an ebony pencil, which you can really push in, and it's kind of much more of a dark, kind of pitch black kind of color. Or value, I guess, in this case. So for the most part, I tried my best to do a lot of the blocking in of certain areas with both the fine and the HB first. And then whenever I needed to intensify, I started to use some of the pencils in the B range. And then when we get to kind of more of the, what is it called, super dark areas, I'll pull out that HB and kind of really intensify those shadows. So a lot of them I used in, I think, Junie's hair and June's eyes, just to make them kind of pop a little bit more. Now, I should have said this in the beginning, I'm very rusty at doing realism, so this one's very simple. I didn't really want to push the values too much because I was a little bit timid doing so. So after this one of June, once we finish him, I'll do like kind of a smaller mini doodle because I wanted to fill out the sketches on the kind of like the side of him, and then we'll work on a larger drawing which will be more anime-ish, I guess. So we're kind of moving down from my attempt at realism again, and then kind of more a semi-realistic kind of cartoony simplified version, and then we'll move on to just like my plain usual anime style. So I didn't show the doodle above, but I'll show it at the very end. I just did a quick sketch of Jonghan, and then this one's going to be of Wonu. And for Wonu, I don't think I captured his features correctly. I still think the sketch turned out pretty cute though, and it's a little recognizable just because of placement of hair and maybe the mouth. But for the most part, I wish I kind of sharpened the eyes just a bit more. I end up changing it a little bit here and there, but the one eye on the very left kind of just bothers me a little bit. So yeah. For these smaller ones, even though, like I said, I usually pick out like an assortment of like a range of pencils before I start, and I like to have light ones and some darker ones. If I remember correctly, I'm either using the fine or the HB pencil to start off as the base, just because it's kind of like our normal typical pencils that we use for sketching. But then after that, I will push the values, and this time I'm using the 3B so that I kind of mix and match the different colors a little bit, or not the colors, I keep saying colors, I mean the values, so that I don't end up burning through only my even numbers of the B range or anything like that. So we can kind of mix and match and get a good range, because using my 2Bs, my 4Bs, and my 8B versus using a 3B and my 7B kind of thing, I'll still get similar results. So I just like to pick and match which ones I want to use rather than doing 2B, 3B, 4B, 5B, 6B, 7B, 8B all like in succession. I don't know if people actually do that, but I tend to only pick a few. I don't usually pick the whole range for the drawing because I feel like it's unnecessary, but some people might be a little bit more meticulous and don't want to get to that really shiny portion of a sketch by burnishing it too much, so you might go ahead and do careful layering before you get up to that point. Now, I think I should have mentioned this when I was describing the different letters and numbers for the pencils. So usually in the H range as well, because the pencil is on the harder side, I think it's a little bit easier for you to get more of a flat kind of gradation almost, or a pass of your tone, because your pencil's a little bit on the harder side, so it's not gonna hit all those grooves and stuff that your softer pencils would hit on rougher paper. So if you don't mind having kind of more white areas in your sketch, you can probably go ahead and go in with your dark colors, or not colors, your dark values, go right ahead. But some people will build up that kind of value slowly so that you're able to fill out more of the paper in a more, I guess, like natural way. So you could fill it up with your H, then your HB, and then your 2B, your 4B, your 6B, 8B, and you probably get a nice kind of even finish. But sometimes if you work just purely with the 8B, you're gonna get more of that softer, hazier, kind of fuzzier effect if you're not pressing down super hard. And obviously for the H pencils, you're not going to press down super hard anyways, because it kind of defeats the purpose. They're meant to be light. The pencil lead is quite hard, so it's kind of not meant to kind of do that. But if you have to, you can definitely do that. But you know, there's different kind of purposes that they excel at, so maybe kind of stick with those if you can. So for the most part for Dan Hung, and kind of like similar to how I was working with June's, kind of like little mini portrait kind of thing, I am going to basically work from light to dark for the most part. But once we get to a certain area of kind of pushing the values, I am going to switch between kind of like my dark and my midtones every so often, so that I can kind of get my range of the values kind of established. So I should have probably mentioned this closer at the beginning of the video. If you can, working especially with your, I guess, dry mediums, this is probably easier for you to do very quickly. Wet mediums and stuff, I think you take a little bit more time to do, but I like to do kind of like a mini value chart by doing it in one stroke. Hopefully that makes sense. It's very similar to how I did the color swatches, or not color swatches, my swatches today, where I was showing you guys me pressing the pencil quite hard, and then we kind of get a mid-tone area and then as light as I can. And it just gives me a good range to know how dark this medium can get versus how light this medium can get. Because if I was given just the 8B pencil, I have to know how light of a mark I can make before it already gets into, let's say, our mid-range, even though I know that the dark range will be quite dark. So right now, you can tell that I'm kind of doing a little bit of experimenting. So I was trying to plan out the lighting for Dan Hung, and it doesn't make entirely a lot of sense. So I'm going to be basically pushing and pulling a little bit, which is good to have kind of your erasers match your style of drawing, if that makes sense, or the type of medium that you're working with. So for any kind of like pencil drawings, I like to have a kneaded eraser so that I can easily lift up any areas to be lighter quite quickly. Basically, you can also meld the eraser to any shape, so that sometimes you need a tinier point, so maybe you can pull out some hair strands, you need to fix up a highlight in the eyes or something, or pull out highlights in the lips or something like that. You can do it quite easily. But then for larger areas, like I did for Dan Hung's cheek on the left side, I needed to chunk out a humongous piece because I didn't want that to be an all in shadow anymore. So I decided to just use the kind of more broad side of the Kneaded eraser so that we can get rid of it. But for the most part, I'm kind of like I said, I'm kind of pushing and pulling the different values. I know some people work primarily kind of light to dark anyways, but for me, I kind of do it section by section as well. I'm making sure that I'm darkening up some of the what I consider the darkest areas, which is where two lines meet. I darkened up the eyes quite a bit so that I make sure that, let's say when I'm adding shadow to the skin, it's not too dark in certain areas or it's too light in certain areas, so that it reads a little bit more clearly, but also giving me a better chance to gradually build up my values slowly so that it doesn't look like I'm chunking them in per se. Also, if you're not exactly a fan of like the slowly building up the value by kind of like hatching and shading and cross hatching, all that jazz, like how I usually work when I work with mechanical pencil, you can definitely smudge your drawings with some kind of tools. I've seen people use, like, you can use tissues, you can use cotton swabs. I think for kind of more like art students or people who are a little bit more familiar with smudging and how they want to smudge and want a little bit more precision, there are different tools. Like some people use like kind of more firm pointed sponges that you can definitely use, and a lot of people use smudge sticks. So smudge sticks are things that I've used quite a bit growing up, actually, when I got into more pencil drawings, portrait drawings, and when people tell you, oh, don't draw anime, you should be drawing faces, and I went through more of a portrait drawing phase. I did a lot of graphite drawing because obviously I have access to graphite regardless if I had these sets or not. Using a mechanical pencil sufficed for the most part. And basically, these smudge sticks are kind of like rolled up kind of newsprint paper, and some of them are burnished in such a way that they're not burnished, they're kind of rolled up in such a way that you can get like sharp points, and some of them are bigger and broader, some of them are more tiny, some are more like flimsy and kind of lighter and stuff, and you can use that to kind of smudge around the excess graphite and all that to kind of make it a little bit more of a smoother transition. So I've seen a lot of people do this when they're working with kind of more like hyper realism or even just photorealism and stuff with pencil drawing, and it kind of gives you like more of a smoother finish. It's similar to like when you're working with colored pencils or pencil crayons and you're burnishing it with like other colors and stuff, or you're using oils to kind of blend and move them to get like more of a smoother transition. Because let's say you're drawing metal or you're drawing skin where it's kind of more of a shiny, more smoother finished for the most part, having all these hatching marks some people don't really like because it doesn't resemble like a photorealistic version. So you can definitely use something like that. Some people use chamois as well, or I think it's spelled CHAMO, no, is it MOIS? It looks like chamois or something, chamois, but I think it's called a chamois, or that's what we called it. And basically it's kind of like this little fabric kind of material that you can use to kind of spread out big areas too, because we had to use a lot of like loose graphite shavings, and then we had to put it onto our vellum and then use the chamois to kind of spread it out and do kind of like a reduction piece where you're erasing to pull out your highlights rather than darkening your darks to get your darker areas and stuff. And it was kind of just learning how to work in a different way so you see things differently, and that was actually my favorite way working with charcoal. So I don't know, for me, I love using dry mediums a lot, even though they're quite messy. So for these pencils, like I mentioned earlier, I actually didn't have too much breakage or anything like that. I think the HB pencil broke once, but that's actually due to my sharpener. My sharpener like snagged the lead tip and like pulled it while sharpening, and it literally would not let go, so it just broke the lead, and I spent too much time trying to get the lead delodged out of the little metal part where I was gripping it. So yeah, for the most part, I think the cores of these are really nice. I had no breakage for the most part when using it, and Dan Hung is basically finished. So I'm kind of giving you guys a small overview. So here's kind of like the June attempt on the left. I'm gonna fill in his neck a little bit because it's looking a little flat and looks kind of weird without anything else around it. Then the two sketches on the right hand, so I have a quick sketch of Jonghan and then the quick sketch of Wonu on the bottom. I actually like Wonu's the most, just because the kind of contrast between the white of the paper and then the dark parts of like the lines and the kind of the hair and kind of like the broader strokes and stuff, I just think it looks kind of nice. And then for Danhung, he is basically done, but I am going to shave a little bit of his hair downwards because he's looking a little oblonged. So yeah, for the most part, you can see kind of where I push the values the most, kind of that dark area on the bottom right of his shoulder-ish area. And then we have kind of a lot more of that darker value where his hand is, so that I could push and make sure that his hair could stand out and not be sucked into the black void that is the background. So I think that's pretty much it for today's sketching session. I did do a little bit in my sketchbook, so maybe it's still considered my sketchbook doodle session. But hopefully you guys enjoyed watching me kind of work with graphite a little bit differently to how I usually work, just because it's not kind of more fully just the kind of like anime style where I'm just hatching and kind of doing just gradual shading and stuff, and this one's a little bit more intense. Hopefully you guys liked today's video, and like I said, if you're interested in checking out these pencils, I highly recommend checking them out if you're interested in working with more dry mediums or just want a fuller range for pencils in general and kind of want to push those values. Definitely give these a go. I think they're a very cute addition to your traditional material setup and stuff. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye!